Jim Sagona, and today we're going to be doing a simple and easy 30-minute project. So every day I come home from work, I'm always throwing my keys and my wallet all over the place. So I decided to make a simple solution today to store the keys in the wallet. So as soon as I come home from work, I'll have them right there next to my car inside the garage. So with this project, we're going to be using one simple recycled piece of pallet wood. This is all the wood we need for today. And we're only going to be using about $5 worth of hardware to complete this project. And all the steps I'm going to show you today, I'm going to use some more advanced power tools. But this project can be completed with only simple hand tools. So we're going to get started today. Okay, so here on the table, we have everything we need to complete the project. A lot of this stuff is completely optional, and it's really going to vary depending on your situation. So the first thing you're going to need is a pair of safety glasses. Right here, I have a 1x4 that was recycled from a used pallet. You're going to need a tape measure. We're going to need a saw. This is a hand saw. You can also use a circular saw or a table saw. A sander or sandpaper. This is an orbital sander. You could also just use hand sandpaper. Today I'm using 60 grit, 120 grit, and 220 grit. You need an attachment method. There's two options here. I used a Kreg jig with pocket holes. Basically pocket holes and pocket hole screws. There's a clamp you need with that kit as well. If you don't have that set up, you just use a simple wood glue. This is a #1 wood glue. You need a driver. There's a standard Phillips head screwdriver, or I have the drill right here. You need other measuring devices. I used a square today, but that's also completely optional. Just makes your life a lot easier. A 3/8 drill bit. You're gonna need a couple screws, and then you're gonna also need your hooks for your keys. Completely optional here, we have the stud finder. If you don't have a stud finder, you can simply find the stud with your knuckle. And then finally here we have our 3-foot bubble level. So for this first step here, we're going to be cutting this down to size. I'm gonna need 2 8-inch cuts of this 1x4. So I don't want to use this piece here just because there's all this blowout. So I'm going to cut that off. I'm going to mark 2 8-inch pieces. Might avoid this knot here. Might come down here and use this end as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this square and just mark past that. I'll use the square and mark past that blowout. I'll cut there. I'm going to measure down 8 inches using the circular saw.
Yes.
Okay, so now I marked my line. So I'm going to be cutting right on this line, and then we're going to make our actual cuts, just because I want to get past this blowout here. Okay, so I made that cut. Now the good thing with using a circular saw is that typically you have to measure cut the 2 pieces. But I'm going to be setting up a stop block here. And that way we can ensure that the 2 pieces of wood that we're cutting 8 inches long are going to be the exact same length. So I'm just going to lock in the blade here. I'm going to take my tape measure here. The tape measure is magnetic, so it sticks to the blade. I'm going to find 8 inches right there. You just want to take a simple piece of wood and clamp that to the fence of the circular saw right at 8 inches. So now since I have my measurements here, I don't have to measure on the piece of wood. So let's mark exactly 8 inches. You guys want to double check your measurements before you make the cuts, because the cuts are permanent. And I'll turn back on the dust cleaner. The wood here has a knot in it. Don't want that in my project, so I'm just going to flip it around to this more clean side. Just going to do a small cut here to get rid of the nails. This is where the nails were for the for the pallet, cut those away. You want to make sure you don't have any nails still inside the board because that can cause some blowout with your saw. And then since I already have my stop block set up, I'm already know I have a perfect cut the next time I cut this. So now we have two pieces of wood. Let's see how close they line up. Yep, that's perfect. Perfectly the same length. Using that stop block ensures that. Otherwise, if you're measuring and cutting each piece individually, you'd have a tough time getting it that exact. Okay, so now we have the pieces cut. And since they're from pallet wood, they have a lot of rough edges here. There's a lot of splinters. You definitely don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to sand them down. I'm going to use today an orbital sander, and we're going to be using 3 grits of sandpaper. We're going to start off with the 60 grit. It's on there now. And we're going to be also using a 120 grit. And then we're going to go down to the finest level I'm going to do today is the 220. That's about all we need for today. It's just got to be smooth to the touch. When you're doing this step, you definitely want to use a face mask just because of all the sawdust. You don't want to get that in your lungs. So I got one here. Okay, so that's the 60 grit there. We're going to go to the 120 now. Alright, so now we're going to be going to the final step, the 220. And if you don't have an orbital sander or sandpaper, you can just get 1 grit. It's not really a big deal, but this is typically the way to get the best results. Okay, so after I'm done sanding, you can see here, this is the finished product. I used the 60 grit, then the 120, then the 220 grit in that order. This is the finished product, so it has a nice smooth surface now. There's no splinters. And this is the original piece that I cut from the pallet at the end. As you can see here, big difference, especially in the color and on the edges here. There's a lot of splinters on the edge, so that really, just that 5 minutes of sanding made a big difference. Okay, so I already have the measurements marked out on the piece of wood. What I did here is I got an 8-inch piece of wood. I'm going to put 2 screws in this piece of wood with my Kreg jig, and they're evenly spaced out 2.5 inches from the ends. And then between those, I'm going to evenly space out the hooks I'm going to be putting on this later on. So this here is a Kreg jig. This is used to make pocket holes. It comes as a little kit here. You get the drill bit and the jig. So what you want to do is you want to find out what the thickness of the wood is that you're going to be using this pocket hole jig for. So this is a 1x4, but a 1x4 is actually 3/4 inches by 3.5 inches. So what we want to know is what the thickness is. So the thickness is 3/4 inches. So on your jig here, there's all markings on the edge here. There's an arrow here that tells you where you want the thickness to be at. I have this set up at 3/4 inches. There's also markings on this box here. If you want to set the drill bit, there's a stop here with a hex key. You lock that in at the thickness of the wood as well. You want to make sure it's pressed in all the way so it's at the marking. And I have it here at 3/4 inches. So we're good to go. I just need to get our clamp. Clamp clips right in here. Whoop. Okay, so I have my piece of wood clamped to the table with the clamp. The jig is attached to it. There's a little sight on the top of the jig. There's 2 holes you could drill with each one of these. I'm going to be doing one on each side. We want to make sure that your mark is in the center of that sight there. We're going to be drilling. So I'll insert the drill in. I'm going to keep drilling until this stop hits. Whoop. Didn't lock it in. There we go. Just want to make sure that it's marked. Knock out all the loose bits. As you can see here, I use the sights so they're right on where I had the markings. Now what you want to do now is use your sander again and just knock down these rough edges and knock off the lines as well. Okay, so now I'm just going to be knocking off the markings I made, and there's a couple rough edges from the pocket holes I made. So we're just going to knock that down with the 220 grit sandpaper again. Okay, so for the next step, we're going to be clamping the bottom bracket where our keys are going to go to the top bracket where the wall's going to go. So I'm going to put the pocket holes on the back side so they're going to be not visible when you're hanging the keys. So I make sure that they're level, nice and even. I'm just going to clamp them down together. Not a little bit off, so we're just gonna make sure they're nice and tight together. I'll check your back side, make sure that they're even. Yep, that looks great. So now we're gonna use, these are the Kreg screws for soft wood. Just gonna use them. I had to drill about a level 10 on the clutch. You want to over tighten these because it could pop through the other end where you don't want it to show. Just like that, that's perfect. And here is the piece. It's now secured. All we're left to do is put our hardware on. Okay, so now I'm going to mark the 3 locations of my hooks. I'm going to use a square again to make sure that the hooks are all positioned at the same height. So I'm going to mark the middle one at the 4-inch mark. We're going to be putting the other outside hooks at 1.5 inches from the outside. Now I chose 1.5 inches because the 2 pocket holes are at 2.5 inches. And I don't want the screws from the hooks to go through the pocket hole locations because that would give us a not great attachment for the screws of the hooks. I'm just going to mark them here. Let's put a nice little dot. Don't need much, just because you don't want this to show up when you are finally putting in when the hooks are on there, they'll cover them up nicely. We'll be able to see them. I got my marks. I'm just going to put the screws, the top screw of each hook on that mark. So I'll use my drill again. And this time I'm going to be using the Phillips head attachment. I believe these screws I got on Amazon, they're about $10 for a 24 pack. You can also get them at Lowe's or Home Depot. Now I make sure that they're all even. I'm just going to tighten them down. I don't want to go too tight on these because it is just pine. Okay, so I'm going to find the stud for the piece. I'm going to use a screw to attach it to the stud. So here's our stud right here. Once it's in the middle, I hit the chute. There it is. Press it in, and it creates a mark right where our stud is. These screws, I'm going to screw it into the stud. And then when I put the hook back on, the hook is going to cover up the screw that I put on here. There you go. Now we just need to put our hook back on. Perfect. All right, now it's on the wall. It's good, nice and flush. Perfect to hold all your keys and wallet.